So can you see it, everything okay? Perfect. Okay, well, it is 12:02 and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to participate in this briefing that I'm going to give about 10 tech items that every business needs to consider in their business strategy. And as a note, I will repeat that I am recording this, so if you don't want to be have your image, then you can just shut off your video. Or if you have questions or comments but don't want your voice heard, you can just put the questions in chat and I will read the questions and give the answers. Moving on, I will be giving a brief background. We can do some introductions. And during that section of introduction, I want you to give your name, the company you work for, what you do, and then one tech concern that you have related to business. And then I will go into the 10 things that businesses should consider in their business strategy, as well as set some time apart for question and answer. If anything urgent comes up while I'm giving the presentation, feel free to press the raise your hand button or put a question in the chat and just pose a question, because it is a small group and I want to give you time to put questions out real time. So that's a consideration. So who I am and what I do. My name is Natima Harrison. I am a certified IT project manager and systems consultant. I own the company Save My Project LLC. I have over 15 years of experience doing IT projects for small companies, nonprofits, and major Fortune 500 companies. The goal of this company is to actually focus on businesses and and nonprofits on the smaller scale to help them implement technology that's in line with their business strategy. Because I know these are the particular type of businesses who can't afford the resource full-time, nonstop, to actually do those implementations and do that strategy and have that expertise. So I'm here to provide the assistance with that for those companies that really need them. So next, I want to hear about you. Again, I would like your name, the company you work for, position, as well as a current technology that you have.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for doing the presentation. My name is Jessica Brown. I work for Edge Webware. We are a complete web services company. I would say, as I get more and more into the IT tech space, the current technology concern that I would say I have is making sure people know who is hosting their website and if they actually own the rights to that or not. So if something happens and they do want to leave, if they can take their website with them, or they lose all their information because their provider or their service provider keeps their website with them. So I feel like that would be my biggest concern and raise awareness to right now.
Great. Yes, that is a very big concern because you never know who actually owns what you think you own. Great. Now I'm going to move on to the 10 things that every business should consider. I want to note that this is based on my 15 years of experience. It's not all encompassing. I wanted to focus on 10 things that most to all general businesses should consider. There are way more things that businesses should consider, and then there are things that should be focused based on your industry, what your goal is, that you should always consider when you're doing your business strategy and your tech consideration. But I just want to make sure that these are 10 things that everyone, no matter what business you're in, what size you are, that you need to consider and what you need to think about. Some of these may seem like, well, why doesn't everybody know about this? Well, common sense is not that common, especially when it comes to technology. Which is why I had this quote of not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So that's to drive home the point that I can't cover everything, and even if I could, I wouldn't cover everything because there's no way to do that. So the first thing I want to make sure that everyone considers is regulation. Every business needs to know what law, what bill, what regulation, what compliance applies to them. because what you don't know can definitely hurt you. Your reputation is at stake when you're not within regulation and compliance, because that is the biggest commodity for any business. If you get hacked or if you're not in compliant and you get fined, it's splashed all over the news and social media. And once you lose that reputation, it is really hard to get it back. Also, everyone needs to understand what regulation applies to them because it's always changing. So knowing when that regulation is more stringent or actually looser will help you understand what your strategy needs to be to move forward and make sure that you're compliant with this new regulation. Now, some of these regulations may not apply to you right now because of the size you are, the amount of revenue, the amount of personnel, but still knowing what this regulation is will help you in your long-term strategy, because when you want to grow, you're going to end up having to be compliant with this different regulation. So it's good to start early and become compliant now when you not necessarily have to, versus when you're making all this money, making all this revenue, and then all of a sudden you have to spend a whole lot of money to catch up. So if you start now, it's a little cost now versus a higher cost later. An example of this would be the 1996 Communication Decency Act, the Section 230 that everyone is talking about in the news, that Congress is talking about maybe completely repealing. That affects everyone that has a website, that has a forum, that has a Facebook page, because if that gets completely repealed, then that affects any content that users have and any protection that you may have with that. So keeping an eye on that and other different kind of regulation is definitely a thing that every business needs to consider. Next is understanding your risk. On that same note of regulation, there's risks associated with owning a business. Of course, risk is the probability of a particular outcome times the impact of that outcome on any objective. Risk is in every business. Now, you have a risk appetite. Every business has a risk appetite, whether you have a statement or not. Your risk appetite is basically your balance of the risk versus the reward. It's very general. It's a general statement of how much uncertainty you're willing to deal with, whether it's a dollar amount, whether it's a percentage of uptime with your technology, or whether it's the percentage of personnel or customers. Now, understand that risk appetite on a broader scale can help you understand your risk tolerance, because that's a variance. So if, for example, you say that you're willing to accept, when coming to technology, that you're willing to accept up to 90% uptime with your internet, your variance could be, okay, our goal is to have no more than, to have an uptime of 90%, but we can deal with 88%. We can't deal with any less than 80% of uptime with our internet. That's what your tolerance is, how much you actually willing to tolerate before management has to get involved to make a decision as to what your next steps are going to be. This risk understanding through the entire company, especially with technology, will inform every decision that you make. And it should be reviewed and adjusted periodically, because your business changes, your regulation changes, and therefore your risk and how you're willing to deal with that risk is going to change. Next is segregation, specifically to IT. In IT, segregation is a very good thing. You never want everything in your technology just sitting in a bucket, in a box, because then once that box catches on fire, everything is gone. You have different levels of criticality when it comes to your assets. Some assets, whether it's people, whether it's computers, whether it's data, is very, very important. And only a certain number of people needs to have access to that data or that information. And so that needs to be segregated. So understanding how this information, how your data, how your technology needs to be segregated in support of your operations is very important. Because yes, as I said, it needs to be segregated. But again, you need to understand how it needs to be segregated, who needs access to what, and so how everything should be separated and how it needs to touch each other and flow through each other. Segregation is going to happen. If you're a one-person team, then maybe things don't need to be that segregated. But as soon as you add another person to your team, they're not going to have access to everything. They don't need access to everything, not at all times. So segregation of data, information, and personnel is key. On that same note of segregation, you need to manage access, because access is power. Who has access to your website? Who can update your website? Who has access to the financial data? Who can update that financial data? What about your intellectual property? What about your inventory if you have an inventory? What about your credit card statements or your invoices? Making sure that whoever has access actually needs that access and they don't have basically a skeleton key into everything is key. Also, with everyone working remote, you also need to make sure that they have access appropriately from whatever device they're using. Encrypting your data, because people lose phones all the time. People lose computers. Making sure that it's encrypted, because hackers happen. It's not about if it's going to happen, it's about when. Making sure that if someone has access to your stuff, that it makes it harder, because hackers want what's easy to get to. So if you can manage that access, when someone leaves, you remove their access, making them change their password frequently, making it harder for hackers to get to what they don't need to get to is your first line of defense. Next is redundancy. Having a single point of failure is just that, a failure, because things don't last. And then if you only have one of anything, then once that's gone, you have to start over from scratch. And this includes your data, this includes your infrastructure, basically how everything is connected, your personnel, as well as everything else. So for example, with personnel, you don't want one person to know everything about a specific process, because what if they got sick? Or what if they quit all of a sudden, just didn't show up anymore? How are you going to continue your business operations without having documentation of how they accessed what they did, how they did their job, and then to make sure the business operations goes through? And the same thing is with your information. Say, for example, you created this wonderful website that isn't fully live yet, but you created this full-on design, and then all of a sudden that file gets corrupted. If you didn't back it up somewhere, your work is completely lost. Or if your internet goes down, how are you going to access things that are in the cloud? Because that's the only way you can access things that are in the cloud, unless it backs up onto your personal computer. So making sure you have that redundancy, especially for that critical assets, i.e. that segregation, then making sure that you have access to it in more than one way, allows you to continue your operations if something were to happen, like a hurricane or tornado, a fire, or if COVID happens or some other pandemic happens, because people literally picked up and had to walk away. They couldn't access that information readily without that redundancy. Next thing that everyone needs to consider is the human factor. Now, this seems like not a technology thing, but business is a social interaction. Every business has to interact with people in order to do business. Technology is the same way. Technology is a facet of that social interaction. Without technology and without people for that technology, they won't mesh. Even if you have AI only works when people interact with that artificial intelligence. Your social media platform only works when people interact with that social media platform, like when you make your posts, when people react to your content, things like that. So if you're ever going to make any technology decision, you have to understand who is going to use it in your company, outside of your company, who's it going to support, what operations is going to support, because those are also people, and how they'll be affected. And I'm not just talking about directly affected. You need to go several degrees of separation, because if you don't understand how far-reaching your technology is when you make that decision, it's going to severely affect that human factor to where they're not going to use that technology, and you may actually lose business. So you need to understand that human factor when you make any technology decision. Audit trails. Now, I understand that when people hear audit, they think hell's coming over and fire and brimstone, because no one likes to have an auditor come, but audit trails are your friend. They cover your assets, they cover your people, they cover your data, and information. They cover your infrastructure and all other property because it tells a story. It says who accessed what and when, what they did. If it was a developer who made a code that was erroneous, it says what developer did it. They have to do a signature. It's timestamped and it's kept in a locked facility. So if someone hacks your information, or if you want to prove that your stuff is being backed up according to a regulation, you can. So those audit trails are key. And having those audit trails early helps because you, as the business owner, may not understand what those audit trails mean, but that auditor will, that IT professional will, that compliance reviewer will, because they're trained to look at that and to make sure that what needs to be monitored is being monitored. What needs to be done is being done. So it is the ultimate proof of action or inaction. So it helps to have an audit trail. It's an easy fix because most systems now are required to have audit trails in everything. Your routers and switches have audit trails. Your computer itself actually has an audit trail. Now that we've covered all the major overarching things, here are some things that are more specific to the business. For example, if you make a technology decision, it has to be relevant to you. I know I said that regulation is key, and understanding IT regulation and understanding how to segregate and redundant and the human factor, but you can have all that taken care of, but if that technology isn't relevant to you, no one's going to use it. It has to be relevant to what your mission is, what your vision is, and what the outcome of your business operation should be. So say if I'm a manufacturing company, I don't need a super fancy accounting software if I'm not doing my accounting. If I farmed out my accounting company needs the best accounting software, and they need to be compliant with whatever accounting regulation. I need to be compliant as a manufacturing company with whatever manufacturing regulation I have. I need the best manufacturing software. If I am, say, in the retail business, well, I need e-commerce. But if I'm in professional services, then I don't need an e-commerce website. I don't need a point of sale system. So why would I buy a point of sale system if I'm not selling a product? That's not relevant to my business and my vision and my mission. Overindulgence. Now you can buy software, you can buy technology that is relevant to your business, but when you buy too much of it, that is just as bad as not buying enough. Because then your human factor has to duplicate efforts. You have to look in multiple places for multiple things. And then you can create gaps in your coverage because every vendor has a suite of packet suite. They say, here, tier up and we'll give you all these extra things. If you don't need those things, don't pay for those things. It's great to have those bells and whistles and things, but if that's not relevant to you or if it's too much, then don't pay for it. Don't ask for it. It's great, but I don't need that many pairs of shoes. I only have 2 feet. I don't need 900 pairs of shoes. It's great to have, but if I don't have room for that, it's overindulgence. If I'm never going to use it, that's overindulgence. Lastly is planning for scalability. Your business wants to grow. You want your business to grow, and your technology should grow and shift with your business. So, and neither one of them is going to stay stagnant. Technology is always going to change. So you want to make sure that you're shifting with what your business wants and your technology is doing the same thing. Now that could be shifting up, shifting down, shifting left, or shifting right. But the way technology is now, it's not that hard to make sure that your technology is shifting with you. There are ways, like with those tiers and those plans, to tier up. Or if you even want to shift completely, whatever technology you've chosen, you make sure that you have that relationship because they have ways of integrating from one software or one platform to another. It's just making sure that you're asking those questions and making sure that you're not afraid to go up to them and say, hey, this isn't meeting my requirements. Any vendor worth their salt is going to make sure that they're giving you what you need so that it is scalable because they want that long-term relationship. And if you need to transition out, that scalability needs to be as seamless as possible. Because if you're going to say from Google Suites to Microsoft 365, they have a transition that can be done with that vendor. Now, making sure that that switch is seamless is a consideration, because you can make a decision, say, oh, one day I want to be able to do this, but if it's too hard, that human factor will be affected, that regulation will be affected, everything else will be affected if you can't scale and shift appropriately. So that also needs to be considered every time you change or shift your business strategy. So I have just given you 10 very broad but very complex things that you need to consider with your business strategy. And it was a lot. It really was. And a lot of people are probably thinking, well, that's a lot. So what do I do now? Well, first thing is you got to take a breath, because it's manageable. It can be done. So you understand your business because it's yours. But as far as the technology considerations, maybe you need to talk to a couple professionals. Like for the compliance side, maybe you need to talk to someone, a lawyer, that has expertise in small business to understand, okay, so if I want to be compliant with this, what side of the legal thing do I need to take care of? If you have cybersecurity questions, or maybe you need to talk to a managed service provider so they can talk about those audit trails and how to monitor for you. So you don't have to monitor for yourself. But also, there are people like myself who are IT professionals and consultants who can review your strategy and make sure that an IT strategy can be in line with your business strategy, to make sure that you're covering those gaps and build that relationship with those other vendors, those other parties, and do that research to make sure that whatever you're implementing in your technology is in line with what you want to do for your business long term. And if you want to shift, how that shift can be done seamlessly so that human factor is not overly affected, so your business operations can keep going the way that they should, and so that you can continue to do the passion of your business and not be bogged down by all these considerations all the time. So you start with the business side and then build the technology side along with that. So I have given you my presentation of my 10 considerations, from regulation all the way down to scalability. I've also let you know that there are professionals that you can talk to. And I did say that I was one of those professionals, and in this presentation, as you can see, is my contact information. So do you have any questions about any of these 10 considerations or outside of these 10 considerations?
That was awesome. That was really good, and it was a lot at once. You're
Yes.
right. I would say one other question. So on the regulation and compliance, is there a specific site or specific spot that people can go to see within their industry what certain regulations there are?
Sure. There are a couple of governmental sites. There is the NIST site, that is the National Institute of Security and Technology. There is also the CISA site, that is CISA.gov, and they do cybersecurity, so they help with the cybersecurity regulations. And then it kind of depends also on what state you're in. So a lot of people who are doing international business, they need to go to GDPR, GDPR.gov, so that if you collect any data from anyone outside of this country, especially in the EU, you need to make sure that you are compliant with GDPR, because if they tell you to scratch it, you have to scratch it. And then if you're doing business with anyone in California, they have a lot of regulation. One of them is something similar to GDPR. It's actually more stringent than GDPR. So if anyone is a resident of California and they're coming to your website and trying to buy things from you and they don't want to be tracked, you have to remove it as well. So if you're trying to be a national company, yes, you definitely, there's a list of governmental sites that you need to be aware of. But also, if some states have some more regulation as well. Most of the states that have the most regulation are California and New York, and Massachusetts are the big ones.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question on the backups, more for the tech side, like the personal side, I completely agree. We, at a manufacturing company I used to work for, we used to call it the bus policy. So if employee happened to get run over by a bus a random day, like, can we still survive? Mm-hmm. And we always were kind of joking, but at the same time, very serious about it, that you need to make sure that your business can still go on if a certain person's not there. But along with the tech side, do you have any recommendations on your personal stuff? Not business-wise, but how somebody should back up their own personal laptop or phone or computer?
Sure. Whether business or personal, because I mean, you can have a business that's really small like mine, it's just me. So what I do is, for the data itself, I have things that are saved on my computer, and then I back everything up to the cloud as well, since the cloud is completely remote. If you also want something that's completely not in the cloud, controlled by someone else, I have a personal hard drive, and I frequently back up to that. So it's pretty mobile. It's about the size of a kind of a thick book. It can fit in your purse or a backpack. And they come with, I think I have one that's 5 terabytes, and it's less than $300.
Okay.
And it can be completely encrypted, password protected. And if you need to snatch it and run, you can snatch it and run.
Perfect. Cool. That's awesome. I think those were my only 2 questions that I wrote down. That was really good. I enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you. On the note of backups, to that bus policy, it's definitely still relevant with technology, because if your technology is quote unquote run over by a bus, you need to make sure you know how to get to the other information, whether it is in like a on-premise, like terabyte little hard drive on your computer. If your computer burns up, can you log in from another computer into the cloud? Or if your business is big enough, are you putting it in a data center? And how do you access that data center, and how are they backing it up? So if you're not in control of you backing up your own stuff, if someone's backing it up for you, you need to ask the same questions you would ask yourself to make sure you can still access that information.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really good. I know that we do go over with all of our customers, like our emergency plan, and if anything happened, making sure that their website would never go down. So it's a good point.
Cool. Well, I do thank you for joining my presentation. I didn't want it to be I didn't want it to be long, because of the fact that it's 10 items, and I could literally give a presentation on every last one of these 10 items. Maybe at some point I will, like in a blog or something, but I wanted to at least give everyone the idea that they needed to at least have it in the back of their mind when they're thinking about, because it's the beginning of the year. You need to think about what you're going to do over this year, maybe next couple of years, and then figure out, okay, if I have this big aspiration, how's my technology going to support it? And is my technology going to support it? And if not, what do I do next? So that was my goal here. It's making sure everyone's thinking not just about their business, but how their technology can support their business without, giving them a giant headache.
Absolutely. I think talking about scalability was huge, especially with COVID. I feel like you hear a lot of companies that either immediately had to downscale, or a company like ours who is growing and we're looking to hire 3 more people, and we just hired 2 other people. So making sure that scalability is something that's structured out, even if you don't think that you're going to get to a certain point with so many employees, like it's possible and it could happen. So it was good.
Because some people did a complete pivot to where they were selling one thing, but then they realized, oh, well, to support my community, I need to do this. So they had to do a complete pivot and say, well, how do I do that? So think about that as well, because I mean, yes, maybe it's a goal of yours to be able to do that pivot. So yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting, very cool to see certain companies and industries in general completely switch how they did business during COVID, and it really showed the creative minds behind it, and like how they could really adjust and, like you said, pivot to what was going on. And companies that could handle that and were on board with that did really well.
Well, thank you again for joining this presentation. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be able to chat again.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.